I come to you with 4 gifts. My first gift is a lotus flower. Do you understand? My second gift is a golden net. Can you recognize it? My third gift is a shepherd's round dance. Do your feet know how to dance? My fourth gift is a garden planted in a wilderness. Could you work there? These are my 4 gifts. Dare you accept them? So this is a Tantric song. It's a Tantric song. You won't find it in the collections of dohas of the great Indian Tantrikas like Saraha or Tidapa or Narapa. But it is a Tantric song, and it's a Tantric song written by my master, my guru, my Kalyana Mitra, Urgyen Sangharakshita Bhante, the founder of our order. It was a poem or song that he wrote in about 1976. And like a lot of Tantric songs, it's a kind of riddle. I mean, if you look up Indian Tantric literature, either the Tantras themselves or the songs of some of the great masters, you really won't understand them. They have often very elaborate commentaries because they're written in a language called Sandhya Bhasa, twilight language, a language which is, you know what twilight is like, you can't quite make out the shapes. They could mean one thing, they could mean something else. So in Tantric songs, you have this imagery and symbolism, which is very often describing meditation practices, yogic practices, esoteric practices, or the description of somebody's insight and vision into things. But this is a kind of modern Tantric song. Vedanya said, your series at Sangha Night is on Tantra now. Tantra now. How do we apply the Tantra to our particular circumstances? What can we learn from the Tantric stream of Buddhism? Well, to do that, I think we actually need to look at somebody who is a kind of Tantric master, not in the sort of formal sense that Sangharakshita, technically I'm sure he wouldn't regard himself as a Tantric master at all. He's far too modest to make any of that kind of claim. But certainly the spirit, the energy, the quality of the energy, the quality of bringing the Dharma into the real, into the actual, into the here and now. That's a very, very important theme in Sangharakshita's project, which is very, very much the Tantric theme. Actually, that is what Buddhism is about anyway, but the Tantra kind of brings it out in a very raw kind of way, a very raw kind of language. And by the way, if you tap Tantra into a Google search, you're very, very likely to be directed to sites to do with Tantric sex. Forget all that. That has absolutely nothing to do with Buddhist Tantra and Buddhist Tantric practice. So just hold all that off if you've read about Sting and all that. just leave all that. That's nothing to do with it. So I want to tell you about this song, this Tantric song, give a sort of commentary on it, try and understand it, try and draw it out. But before I do that, I want to say something a bit more about Sangharakshita. I first met Sangharakshita when I was 17, down in Brighton. And if you see pictures of Sangharakshita now, he's a very, very elderly man, in quite poor health. Looks very much like an elderly grandfather, with white hair and a walking stick and so on. Well, when I first met him, he didn't look like that at all. He had long, greasy black hair, seemed to wear a kind of slightly greasy check jacket and trousers, and he seemed to at that time wear these quite big boots, and he was very, how can I put it, he felt quite dangerous to be around. He was somebody who was always themselves. One of the things I always felt about being around Bhante, around Sangharakshita, and why I'd regard him as a sort of tantric person, I always felt anything could happen. It's not that he was wild, often he was deeply silent. Deeply silent. But you felt, hang on, anything could happen. And sometimes, you know, being young and excited and so on and so forth, I'd ask a question or something like that, and the answer would always seem to come from left field. And I'd do that kind of funny laugh you do when you feel slightly uncomfortable. What does he mean? What's he saying? Can he read my mind? You know, all that projection thing that you do when you're that age. But one of my first meetings with him, we were sitting in this tiny room in the then Brighton Centre. And he wasn't talking, he was just sitting there, looking ahead, in a way looking very concentrated. Not exactly fierce. Certainly wasn't making small talk. And I was sitting there feeling fairly uncomfortable, wondering what to say. It wasn't making it easy for me. At a certain point, he put out his hand, took an incense stick out of a jam jar and started to clean his ears. When I went to India, that was quite a common sight, actually, people cleaning their ears with incense sticks. But I'd never seen it. What was really interesting was my first thought when I saw him do this, what would my mum say? It's a real giveaway, you know, my mum being a very proper person sort of thing. But that was the kind of, you know, so that I regard that as a sort of tantric moment in my life. This person with whom anything could happen. And, you know, I was ordained by Sangharakshita, which I definitely experienced as a transmission of energy. A transmission of energy. There you are, Britannia. There's some energy in this talk. One of the things that's very important in Tantric Buddhism is what they call abhisheka, which means anointing or sprinkling, or wongkur it's called in Tibetan, which means transmission of power. What it is really about is introducing you to a meditation practice. It's the recognition by the teacher of your spiritual commitment and your connection with a particular with the Buddhist tradition and a particular Buddha form, and in that you'll also receive a name typically. Our ordination ceremony that Sangharakshita sort of devised based on traditional sources is a very stripped down, essentialized version of initiation. It's not just ordination, it's initiation. And my experience of that was this tremendous release of energy. It was, and I would say that energy still goes on. Somebody was asking me the other day where I got my energy from. And I gave a number of answers, but actually I think where I get my energy from is from my ordination. And the essence of ordination is your commitment, your deep resonance with the Dharma and with the Buddhist path, being seen and witnessed and verified by somebody who you revere and respect. Being with Sangharakshita, looking back at my ordination, there's a kind of feeling. I was about 19 when I was ordained, so quite young. There was this feeling that I was being taken completely and utterly seriously by the man that I revered more than anybody in life. Being taken completely seriously, not in words, but in the ritual act. Being seen by somebody you revere is extremely powerful. In fact, it unleashed very, very frightening energies in some ways. I wasn't quite, in some ways, ready for it. It took me quite a long time to, as it were, integrate for that energy to sort of, pervade the rest of my being. But in those days, Sangharakshita, when I recite this poem, think about this poem, meditate on this poem, I always see him for some reason, as I did at the time of my ordination. He was wearing yellow robes, and this is really interesting, the yellow robes of a traditional Theravada monk, but he had long hair and beads, and I really like that because traditionally Buddhist monks should have shaved heads, they shouldn't be wearing beads, but I love that kind of clash of iconography. There was something deeply subversive about that, which again is a very kind of tantric approach to things. You know, way Tantric Buddhism takes place in the kind of liminal spaces, you know, in the spaces that are kind of outside of convention. That's where, in a sense, all the creativity comes. Tantric, the original Tantric masters, very, very often dodgy characters. You're not quite sure, are they saints? Are they sinners? Does that actually matter? Very interesting people. So I was really glad that my teacher kind of was crashing these boundaries. And it was, you know, the early days of our Sangha and the forming of our Sangha was a tremendously creative time for him. You know, he'd been sort of thrown out of the very small Western Buddhist establishment, you know, and he'd lived very properly as a Buddhist monk in India. And he kind of went, he said he sort of went into a kind of shamanic phase. Very, very interesting sort of period of experimentation, exploration. The tremendous poem that he wrote around this time that, to give you a kind of flavour of the kind of early days of setting up our Sangha. This is a tantric poem, another tantric poem. I want to break out, batter down the door, go tramping black heather all day on the windy moor, and at night in hayloft or under hedge, find a companion suited to my mind. I want to break through, shatter time and space, cut up the void with a knife, not shrink back when, lidded with darkness, the eye of reality opens and blinds me, blue as the sky. So that's the kind of, you know, mood, you know, he was in, wandering around London or going to other places, that kind of energy. And our Sangha, our community, comes out of that. It comes out of that energy, finding companions suited to his mind, finding people who would really get the energy of his vision of the Dharma. And over time, I think that vision of the Dharma did start to sort of crystallise, did start to become clearer. Sangharakshita never started this movement with some sort of plan. He's always been a deeply intuitive man. It might surprise you from, if you've read any of his books, how sort of precise, some would even say pedantic they are and how careful they are. But he's very, very intuitive. He's always acted and then worked out afterwards what the significance of the act was. So this poem, written in 76, does represent the sort of crystallisation, I think, of living the Dharma, communicating the Dharma, befriending people, embracing people who were serious about the Dharma. So let's just go through this poem. Hopefully we can still reference releasing energy and all this. And just see how you know, a kind of modern tantric master kind of lives it out in this riddling poem. So I come to you with 4 gifts. So that whole kind of almost prophetic statement, that tremendous confidence, is another feature of the old, particularly Indian tantric masters. They just tell it, you know, with joy. They just tell and celebrate their vision, their insight, you know, without any apology. They just say things like, hey, listen. That's that kind of language. They really tell it out loud and proud, very confidently. I come to you with 4 gifts. My first gift is a lotus flower. Do you understand? There's all sorts of symbolic resonances with the lotus flower in Buddhist tradition. Perhaps there's a resonance from the Chan tradition, the Zen tradition, the origins of Zen. The Buddha holds up a golden lotus flower, and just one of his disciples understands. Mahakāśyapa understands. He gets it. There's no words, no explanation. He just knows what the Buddha is communicating through that symbolic action, the holding up of a golden lotus flower. But there's you know, and if you get it, if you just hear that phrase, you understand without any explanation, great, we can, just switch off for the next few minutes as I add flowers to brocade, as the Chan tradition puts it. So if you've got that, you understand the lotus flower, just have a little break, go into meditation or something. But the lotus, it's such a fabulous, wonderful, beautiful image in Buddhist tradition. It sort of resonates down the ages in Indian tradition generally, the lotus flower. If you've ever seen lotuses in India, they usually grow in the muddiest of swamps. They really do. Black, viscous swamps. And, you get these deep pink lotuses, or white or blue, but I particularly remember the sort of deep pink ones. And they're sort of luminous and translucent, above this black, viscous mud. They really are utterly beautiful. I mean, they really are stunning, captivating. They draw. You can see why the lotus is used in love. It's a real symbol of love imagery. It's so fascinating, to look at. You're drawn in, to this wonderful scene. But of course, its deep Buddhist origins, its primal Buddhist origins, is this wonderful vision of the Buddhas, isn't it? Where after his enlightenment, he sees with his Buddha eye, his eye of enlightenment, he looks at life, he looks at all beings, especially human beings. And they're in a way, because he's looking with his Buddha eye, that means there are no real words to describe what he's seeing. This is really important. There aren't words to describe it. It's his Buddha eye. It's the eye of voidness, if you like, that's seeing. So it's beyond conceptualization. So he uses a metaphor, he uses an image. He said it's as if, and as if, what he sees, or the way he explains what he sees, is that we are like those red and white and blue lotuses growing up out of the viscous mud. That's what we are as living beings. The buds are tightly closed, or they're slightly opening, and the Buddha, in seeing that, is just overwhelmed with compassion, with love, because he sees that, well, in a sense, he's seeing his full enlightenment reflected in all life, reflected in the growth, the movement, the unfolding of living beings, and he makes this decision to communicate, to go and tell. So it's really important that the Buddha's compassion, in a sense, isn't for our suffering. Not as suffering as we usually understand it. The Buddha's compassion is actually seeing our fullness, seeing that lotus emerging in us, seeing that movement to transcendence, to use that sort of language, seeing that struggle. It's very, very positive, very joyful, actually, the Buddha's love and compassion. That's why the Buddha's compassion is very hard to understand. We usually project pity onto it. It's not that. Something quite different. It's actually a vision of every single individual's strength, bursting forth, trying to break free out of that mud. So do you understand? Do you understand? I think one of the things that Sangharakshita is getting at is, do we understand what we are as human beings, who we are, what our life is for? I mean, the lotus is a flower, isn't it? It's a growing thing, a living thing. And the thing is, us human beings, we are growing and living things, aren't we? We, if you like, if you want to see it in evolutionary terms, we're sort of the product of so many growing and living things. And we have arrived into this uniquely privileged state of consciousness. Uniquely privileged state of consciousness. Human consciousness is, I know we give ourselves a hard time as human beings, how awful we are to the planet and to each other and all the rest of it. All that's true. But don't forget, we have a remarkable gift as human beings. We have this wonderful thing called consciousness, self-reflexive consciousness. This is fantastic. Having that kind of quality of consciousness that isn't just stuck in the senses, that can actually draw back
that just doesn't have to react with appetite or aggression or something like that, which can actually step back and say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to live according to a value. I'm going to live to an ideal. That is amazing. What a gift. How did we get that? I know a lot of people give themselves a hard time, poor self-view and all the rest of it. Well, don't worry about that. You've got this fantastic consciousness, which one of the things it can do, it can leap ahead. It can leap forward and imagine, intuit, praise, love, a vision, an ideal being. This is the quality of faith in Buddhism, Shraddha, which is often explained as Shraddha is that which leaps as it were, out beyond the present definition, and sees, intuits us in our, if you like, in eternity. We've got a sort of connection with that. We've got a connection with Buddhahood, a resonance with the fullness of the Buddha's wisdom and compassion. And that means that we can grow. That means that we can keep expanding. So understanding what the lotus flower is understanding what our life is for. We've been thrown up into this human life. The next thing to do is to grow. The next thing to do is to expand. The next thing to do is to open up. The next thing to do is to unfold the lotus flower. This is what all Buddhist practice is about. All the Buddhist methods of meditation, ethics, Dharma study, spiritual friendship, things like yoga, Tai Chi, all the different things that can go on in the centre. The arts, culture, whatever it is, it's all for this emerging consciousness. It's all for that. It's all for the sort of, the blossoming of our being. Perhaps, I think the word growth and development, they're sort of a bit cliched and hackneyed now. One of the things we need to experience, I think, or you can experience when you're meditating, particularly, or at any other time, is of your being blossoming and flowering. I don't know if you've ever felt that in meditation. It's something well worth sort of looking for. You can't force it. But you've probably come across this idea that in Tantric Buddhism of the centres, the chakras, the different sort of psychic centres. The chakras are lotuses. And whether or not you visualise them or anything like that, in a way that's beside the point. When you practice, you can experience the blossoming, the flowering of your being. You can experience yourself as abundant and opening. So all of our Buddhist practice is for that end. That's what Sangharakshita is offering in his first gift. Understand that that's what life is for. That's what all Buddhist practice is for. It's for this continual, endless unfolding, even unto the opening of the 1,000-petaled lotus itself, which is the symbol of enlightenment itself. So that's the first gift. But my first gift is a lotus flower. Do you understand? So my second gift is a golden net. Can you recognise it? A golden net. So what's he trying to communicate here? So the word gold, first of all, is in Buddhist tradition, many traditions, it's a symbol of incorruptibility. It's a symbol of absolute purity. That's what the golden bit is about. And a net. What is this net that we have to recognise? This golden net, this crisscrossing of golden cords. Where is this net? How can we see it? What is this net? Well, the net in Buddhist tradition is an image that the Buddha uses himself. The very, very first discourse in the Buddhist text, the oldest Buddhist text, is called the Brahmajala Sutta. The net of Brahma, the great net, the divine net, the vast net, the greatly expanded net. And in this particular discourse, what the Buddha does is take all the views of all the religions and philosophies of the time in India, and he gathers them all up into the net of the vastness of his wisdom. It's a very critical text. It's actually pointing out the the wrong interpretation, particularly of meditation experience by many of the great masters of the day, the illegitimate overgeneralizations from exalted meditation experience. The Buddha just sees through it all, gathers all the views up in a great net, shows their limitation and points to the vastness of his wisdom. Another net in Buddhist tradition, in later Buddhist tradition, is known as the Indrajala. The Indrajala. This is the net of Indra, the king of the gods. And the net of Indra is a remarkable net because it's made entirely of jewels. And every jewel reflects every other jewel without losing its own unique individual jewelness. And this is an image that the Buddha uses in the Avatamsaka Sutra for reality itself. Reality is that. Nothing but this great net. All of us, all of life, in this realm, in other realms, the Buddha realms, all of the cosmology, everything interpenetrates, mutually interpenetrates everything else. We mutually interpenetrate everybody else. It's a kind of extension of the Buddhist idea, the early Buddhist idea of pratitya samappada, conditioned co-production, dependent origination. There's nothing, nobody, no thing that is isolated and separate. There are no separate, isolated selves in that sense. There is nothing but the flow of conditions. There is nothing but that intersecting one another. Another image the Avatamsaka Sutra uses is of coloured beams of light, multicoloured, all crisscrossing, but they're all distinct. It's a really cosmic vision, and they weren't on drugs when they had this vision. They saw that with their meditation. So this is the net. What the net he's pointing to is the way things are. That's the net that we have to recognise. It's great when we take up Buddhist practice that we feel ourselves flowering, blossoming, unfolding. It's wonderful that experience. It's great to look back. If you're not feeling that you're flourishing at the moment, I know some people are. Well, just have a look back, a year or two ago. What were you like then? Because actually, you might well notice, comparatively, I've got somewhere. It's very, very important. I think we're not very good at reflecting on our experience sufficiently. I think I think we can be quite weak on that, us human beings, and actually sort of seeing where we've come from. It's all got to be perfection now. Well, that's not going to happen. It's not going to be like that. There is always going to be this unfolding, and it's always good to look back. Where am I? Of course, you might have slipped away. You might have gone backwards. People do. You get that phenomena as well. Some people come along to the centre. They, come along in a bit of a state. They take up meditation, meet nice people, all the rest of it. They're put back together, and they think, great, I can go and make it in the world again. And of course they go out there and do it, and then they come back beaten up, smashed up, and they have to start again. This is what can happen. You go up and down in your Buddhist practice if you don't keep up the actual conditions, the methods that keep this flourishing and growing. So you need to see the golden net. You need to recognise the golden net. You need to see the way things are. Because when you see the way things are, you can't go backwards. You can't go backwards. You're irreversible in that path of growth and unfolding. You can't go backwards. This is what they call stream entry or irreversibility or the point of no return. And sometimes you can even get a little feeling of that. You might not be confident that you're absolutely a stream entrant, and it's probably quite a good idea not to be absolutely confident, especially don't tell people, because if you go backwards, it's going to be rather embarrassing. I've actually met a lot of stream entrants who aren't anymore. Well, they certainly don't look like it anyway. So be careful with that one. It's very dangerous. Yeah, it's I've got off the point. It's really important to see, to really look into the nature of things. And that isn't something extra from this sense of your flourishing, your flowering, your growing. This is really important. Sometimes you can come across, Buddhists talking in a bit of a weird way. There you are, doing your practices and you're growing and unfolding, and somebody might say to you, yeah, but where's your insight? Where's your insight, bro? You say, oh, I haven't got one. Well, of course you have. That experience of continual unfoldment is shunyata. What we call shunyata is emptiness. You just need to recognize it. If you have a real sense of your life, of your Dharma life being a living thing, a growing thing, and your consciousness is expanded, or as the Buddha says, your liberation of the heart is maturing. The lovely phrase that the Buddha uses in the sutta, that you're the maturing of the liberation of the heart. If you have that feeling, well, recognize that. Really look into that. Rejoice in it. See it. That is the beginning of seeing into voidness, seeing into the golden net, seeing even the interconnectedness of you and other. Because what goes with this unfoldment, and as it gets more reversible, is that you can't separate yourself out from others. There comes a certain point in your Dharma life where you just can't think of, well, this is for me, and, I ignore everybody else. You just can't do that. The fact you might feel great is one thing, but if you notice that other people are in a bit of a state around you, that affects you. So in that sense, there can be no such thing as a purely personal attainment. You might well be doing very, very well in your own Dharma life. But when you look out and you notice somebody around you is suffering or they're not getting on very well, that affects you. The attainment of others is as important as your own. The welfare of others is as important as your own. You've dissolved that sort of purely self-cherishing. You cherish others because you've seen, to some extent, the golden net. The welfare, the flourishing of others is as important to you as your own. You can't separate it out. There's another really important way of talking about, well, hang on, let's have a tantric poem. This is a tantric evening. This is a traditional one. This is the great Sara. Listen to this. This is fantastic. This is myself, and this is another. Be free of this bond. That closes you, and you will be released. Do not err in this matter of self and other. Everything is Buddha without exception. Here is that immaculate and final stage, where thought is pure in its true nature. The fair tree of awareness that knows no duality spreads through the whole world. It bears the flower and fruit of compassion, and its name is serving others. The fair tree of emptiness abounds with flowers, acts of compassion of many kinds, and fruit for others appears spontaneously. For this joyful activity is completely egoless. He who clings to emptiness and neglects compassion does not reach the highest stage, but he who practices only compassion does not gain release from the toils of life. He, however, who is strong in the practice of both, remains neither in samsara nor in nirvana. This is the highest bliss. So that's one of the great siddhas, Sara. So yes, at a certain point, you can't separate yourself out from others. You're working intensively on yourself, but you're equally concerned with the welfare of others. So this brings us actually to the third gift. My third gift is a shepherd's round dance. Do your feet know how to dance? So this is strange one. And I remember when somebody was giving a talk on this with Sangharakshita present, he said, and in the talk, the person said, well, I hope Bhante can tell us what the Shepherd's Round dance is. And Sangharakshita said, I can't quite really remember what I had in mind, but never mind. A Shepherd's Round dance, but I think what it is, it's a dance, isn't it, of a community. One of those circle dances. I remember years ago I was on an ordination course in Spain, and one of the guys on the retreat, he was an accordion player, and he'd been taking up Balkan and Mediterranean dancing, and it was fun, and we did it. It was great. It was one of those dances where you've got your arms on the shoulders of your brothers, and you're doing these steps like that, sort of thing in a circle. So I know it sounds ridiculous. It was amazing. It was really good. There was a very, very strong sense of fraternity, brotherhood. It was a men's retreat, and I thought we should be doing this. This should be our Sangha dance. Not everybody kind of freaking out doing a solo. I mean, maybe somebody could do a solo in that, but it's something that is a community doing it. I think that would be really good. And that is what Sangharakshita is getting at: the dance of Sangha. The dance of spiritual friendship, the dance of community. In Sheffield you have a fantastically varied, wonderful spiritual community of order members, mitras, friends, people who've asked for ordination, and looking out people with so many different backgrounds and talents and qualities. I mean, I've been around long enough to see an extremely rich Sangha. Well, there's a dance that goes on. That's a very good way, I think, of describing all the sort of interactions and currents of friendship and communication, that goes on between people. And of course, this is the nucleus, the creation of a kind of new kind of community. It's not something that's a clique. We want to open it up, to more and more people, so more and more people can enter that, that joyful dance of communication. And of course, in a dance, especially when you're learning the steps, you tread on people's toes, you bump into them, you get the steps wrong, you mess it up, other people react, they have a go at you, you have a go back, then you apologise, you put it right, you confess your faults, you say sorry, you rejoice in the steps of somebody, and so on and so forth. So it's a great image, I think, for friendship and communication. It shows the sort of dynamism of spiritual community. And of course, in a dance, you are supremely aware of self and other. You have to be aware of your own steps, you have to be aware of the steps of everybody else in the dance. So within a Sangha like this, you're learning how to develop that sense, not just of your own development, but the development of others as well. That's the dance of Sangha. And of course, to do a dance, Padanya, you need to have a lot of energy. And dancing does release a lot of energy. So there's an amazing poem by Sangharakshita, a long poem called On Glastonbury Tour, which I don't have with me, but he went with a group of people Sangharakshita was well ahead of the game with Glastonbury people. I mean, long before the first Glastonbury Festival, the big period stage and that. He was down there. And there's this great line in this poem, this long poem, about how the group of them are going around the tour. And it's not so much a dance, I think it is a sort of dance, it becomes. They're all holding hands and going round. And he describes it as churning energies out of the earth. Churning energies out of the earth and encountering, as they go around, these symbols in mist comes up, and they keep encountering these symbols of Arthur and Merlin and cup and lance, really sort of getting down deeply into the sort of, those deeper forces in that particular place. Very strong stuff. And that's also what happens in the Sangha, in the dance of Sangha. Energies are churned up, through communication. And communication, Sangha, is really a really profound act. Sometimes people say to me, who've been away, been involved in our Sangha, and then they go to another group or teacher because they feel that would be better for them, and that's fine. But one of the things they say, but I really miss Sangha. I really miss spiritual community. And I have to say to them, look, what you need to understand, spiritual community, our vision of it, isn't a kind of mistake. It's not a sort of, it's not an accident. It actually comes out of a profound insight into the nature of the Dharma, into the nature of enlightenment. Sangharakshita is not a party person, he's not a socialite, he's actually a very introverted, private sort of man in a way. That's one of the reasons why he says he didn't think he was the best person to start a new Buddhist movement. He didn't really have the qualities for it. He's not a sort of clubbable, socialite kind of guy, nothing like that at all. You know, he's more of a sort of, he keeps to himself in a certain sort of way. But he saw very, very deeply, very early on, that enlightenment is friendship. Enlightenment is communication. Enlightenment is a seeing through of self and other. It's that profound. So it will manifest in friendship, in profound communication with one another. That's where our Sangha, our vision of Sangha, comes from. It comes from the deepest insight into the nature of things. And if we really want Sangha, it can't just be a kind of social thing. It's good that we do the social things, but we've got to be looking deeply, deeply into the nature of reality itself. So yes, the shepherd's round dance. I really like this particular image because when I became a mitra, and in my day, when you became a mitra, it was a private ceremony with Sangharakshita and 2 order members who became Kalyana mitras. And I went into the ceremony after a number of other ceremonies from the people from our centre. So it was Sangharakshita, Buddhadasa and Vasantra, the 2 order members of Kalyana mitras. I'm sitting between them. I don't quite know what was going on. Maybe Sangharakshita was just tired because he'd done a load of ceremonies before me. But he wasn't smiling. And I took the offerings from him and made the offerings and sat down. And then he gave a little discourse. And he wasn't smiling. He said, becoming a mitra is like joining a dance. You have been in the wings watching the dance. You've tried out a few steps, but you haven't joined the dance yet. Maybe one day you'll get to the middle of the dance, but at the moment you're in the wings. This is your first action. This is your first step. This is you joining the dance. This is your act of commitment. He said, everything has been thought, everything has been felt, everything has been said. Now it's time to join the dance. Now it's time to act. And I really felt told off, actually looking back, I think it was fair enough, I was very full of myself, very young, I could quote the Buddhist scriptures, it must have been such a pain, quoting to order members reams of the Bodhicharya Avatar or something like that, without any experience, very intoxicated by it. But, I really took that to heart. This is joining the dance, this is the act, because spiritual community comes from commitment. It comes when people, decide to take further steps into the dance. You can only go at your own pace. You can only go when you want to go. There's no pressure to go into it, but it does represent that action, that dancing. So that's the third gift, a shepherd's round dance. Do your feet know how to dance? Lovely question. And then finally, my fourth gift is a garden planted in the wilderness. Could you work there? A garden planted in the wilderness. Sangharakshita has this very bold vision of the Dharma. He believes, he sees that the Dharma is what's needed. That if everybody was doing something like Buddhist practice, following that sense of flourishing along the path, seeing into reality, coming together into the dance of friendship and community, then the world would be a much better place. It would be less of a wilderness, and it is a wilderness. Wildernesses are in a way fascinating places. They're wonderful places in a sense, but they're also very dangerous. They're very, very dangerous places, wildernesses. You know, there's no order in a wilderness, even though they're wonderful. But it is nature red in tooth and claw. We can go into it, enjoy it. But, you know, if we're going to live there, we need to kind of create something where there is a certain sort of protection. That's what a garden is, isn't it? It's what paradise is, from the old Persian word, I think, isn't it? For garden, that sense of something where people can come together and they're protected so that they can flourish and grow. And of course, we want to create gardens in the wilderness that join up. That's the vision. What he also calls building the Buddha land. Creating a world in which spiritual values, Dharma values, are paramount. So he's offering this as a gift to us. Are we prepared to work together to create this kind of world? I mean, you know, I don't know, I know some of you here, but certainly don't know all of you here. But I would hope when you come to the Sheffield Buddhist Centre, there is a sense of coming into a place which is a bit of a refuge. I know sometimes people speak of the centre as a sort of oasis. You know, they're feeling a bit parched out there in the workplace, maybe even sometimes the family, dare I say. It's all a bit tough. It's all a bit difficult. Just because you are not seen as that unfolding, flourishing, abundant lotus flower, you know, bringing about the maturing of the liberation of the heart. You're just not related to in that way. So it's an enormous relief to come into a space where you can be seen for that, appreciated for that, enjoyed for that, and where everything supports that. So we need lots of these gardens. This is a fantastic centre here, but Sheffield is a big city. You know, we really ought to have branches of the Sheffield Buddhist Centre all over the place, I think, in Sheffield. And in other places as well. You know, let's create these gardens, you know, in the wilderness for people. So he finishes, of course, with that line, "These are my 4 gifts. Dare you accept them?"